For Cassidy Hutchinson, it has been 15 months since her testimony that turned the world on its ear. She has spent those 15 months out of sight, in part for her own safety, but also to write this book and also to do 3 separate interviews with U.S. Justice Department prosecutors and 1 with the grand jury in Fulton County. The former president she served and who she says she at one point adored and to whom she was quite loyal for a very long time, he's now been indicted in 4 different jurisdictions on dozens of felony counts. Cassidy Hutchinson says she found the bravery to stop effectively lying by omission, to start telling what she actually knew when she first read the story of this man, a man who had basically the same job as hers under a very different president. Alexander Butterfield had also been effectively chief of staff to the White House chief of staff under President Nixon. Sort of a low-profile, low-name recognition position, but one with access to very high-level, very sensitive goings-on. Like Cassidy Hutchinson, Mr. Butterfield was a loyal Republican, loyal to the president, didn't ever want to be anything other than good at his job and a help to the administration he served. But like Cassidy Hutchinson, Alexander Butterfield also felt he needed to be honest about what he had seen and what he knew. Alexander Butterfield is how the nation learned there was a taping system in the Nixon White House during Watergate. Cassidy Hutchinson, seen here meeting with Mr. Butterfield after her testimony. She is how the nation learned all the worst things we now know about, as she puts it on page 321, quote, an unhinged chief executive willing to overturn the will of the people and plunge the country into chaos and violence on the advice of crazy people. For what? To avoid the embarrassment of conceding an election he knew he had lost? She said, quote, that is who he is. In her testimony, we also know that is who she is. She's a paragon of bravery. She has a new book out called Enough. It comes out tomorrow. She's here tonight for the interview live. Stay with us. First rioters have breached the Capitol. They're inside. I'm registering the development as Pat Cipollone and Pat Philbin barrel past me and barge into Mark Meadows' office. The rioters are in the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now, Cipollone insists. Mark is a statue on his couch. He doesn't want to do anything, Pat. Pat calmly gives Mark direction. Mark, something needs to be done. People are going to die, and the blood is going to be on your hands. This is getting out of hand. I'm going down there. My eyes are locked on Mark. Get up. Go with Pat. Mark slowly stands, leaning against the arm of the couch, and walks silently to my desk. He's clutching his eyeglasses in his fist. His knuckles are white. He sets his phones on my desk. Let me know if Jim calls, meaning Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan calls minutes later. I feel a pang of hope. 1 sec, I'll go get him. I go to the dining room. Is Mark in there? I ask the valet. The valet nods. I look through the peephole and see the back of his suit. I open the door to get his attention. The group is having a heated conversation about the rioters. Mark sees me. I point at the phone screen where Jim's caller ID is visible. He comes over to take the phone, propping the door open with his body as he talks to Jim. I take a few steps back as Mark takes my place in the doorway, and I strain to listen to both conversations. The TV in the Oval dining room is blaring. The president is yelling. What's he saying? I can't make it out. I hear him say, hang, repeatedly. Hang, hang, what's that about? Mark hands his phone back to me, the cue for me to return to my desk. Back in my office, my phone notifies me of a Trump tweet. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. Hutchinson continues. I'm struggling to process what's happening as Mark, Pat Cipollone, Pat Philbin, and Eric Hirschman stumble back to the office. I overhear their conversation, and suddenly everything makes sense. They are calling for the vice president to be hanged. The president is okay with it. He doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. He thinks Mike is a traitor. This is crazy. We need to be doing something more. My phone is pinging nonstop with emails, texts, signal messages, and unanswered calls. Mark's phones are too. I am devoid of emotion as I consider what I should do. And then, letting what I just heard sink in, I'm gripped with anger and hurt. I snatch my coat. I run out of the office to go to the Eisenhower building. I need to check in with Mark's Secret Service detail. We need to have a plan in case the worst happens, in case this is the beginning of a coup. That is from Cassidy Hutchinson's new book, which is called Enough, which is out tomorrow. Ms. Hutchinson, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me, Rachel.
This is the first live interview you've done in the media. It is the second live interview you have done in life. The first one was your testimony. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it's an honor to have this as my first live interview. Well, second live interview, I guess.
Second live interview. The first one much more consequential than this one, don't worry. I mean, it's been 15 months since that testimony. Your life has changed dramatically since then. I said, based on what I read in your book, but I didn't ask you about this ahead of time, I said in my introductory remarks that a lot of the reason that people haven't heard from you or seen you out in the world in the last 15 months is, at least in part, because of concerns about your security. Is that fair? Is that still a real life concern for you?
That's a fair assessment, yes.
How are you taking care of yourself in that regard? I mean, you don't have to tell me anything I shouldn't know.
No, you're fine. Open book. It's been difficult in a lot of ways. But it's open. This year has helped me open my eyes to the dangers that Trump actually poses on people in these situations. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the only one. And I wish I could say I'd be the last person, but unfortunately I won't. And that's what he does to people that he thinks that speak out against him or that detract from him. And it's one of the more dangerous things about Donald Trump, too. This is something we've seen time and time again, and it shouldn't have to be like this.
You write about, in the book, repeatedly about your regret for having not supported him, but specifically for having facilitated some of the political attacks that he launched as president on people that were designed the way he designs them, to hurt people maximally and in some cases to expose them to danger. Did that give you any insight into why he needs politics to work that way for him, and any insight into how to combat it?
It gave me an insight into his psyche while I was writing the book, and helping understand my circumstances with it and what I dealt with after I testified. But with that said, it helped also open my eyes to what he wants from people. He wants to know that he's getting a reaction. He thrives when he has an audience. It could be a negative audience. It could be an audience that he likes. It could be his base. But what he needs is to hear people reacting to him. And that's when he knows in his mind that he has been successful to something.
Is that why you've never responded to his attacks on you?
I've never responded to his attacks on me because I don't need to give them oxygen. He is going to say what he's going to say, and he's said much worse things about much better people than I am.
The kind of pressure that you describe experiencing to protect Mr. Trump, I mean, some of it was self-directed, right? You say at one point in the book, and it struck me, you said that you adored him at one point, that you were and are very much still a Republican, that you believed in what he was trying to do for the country. You wanted to be a good staffer. You wanted to serve the White House. You wanted to do right by your colleagues. And that sort of easily leads toward the next post-presidential project for him, which is protecting him from all the investigations around January 6th and everything else. But that pressure not only came from you, it also came from his world. You didn't have financial resources to hire your own lawyer. You didn't have access to a lawyer at the outset who would represent you for free. You ended up with a Trump world lawyer who you describe as having not told you to lie, but encouraged you to not tell everything that you knew. That pressure is it's not just a Cassidy Hutchinson biographical detail, it is a live issue for a lot of people right now. There's a lot of people in multiple jurisdictions deciding if how they're going to respond to a subpoena, what they may testify to in court, what they're going to do about their legal representation. This is a live issue for a lot of people right now. And some of them may be watching right now. What would you say to them about how to balance the equities in that kind of a calculation?
In my opinion, I don't know if there really is a way to balance the equities. If you have a self-interest of being completely forthcoming and truthful in what you're witnessing that could potentially hurt or damage Mr. Trump, and not even speaking to the issues of legal counsel, just as a person knowing what I experienced. And like you said, some of it was self-inflicted for me. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how I felt about these circumstances surrounding January 6th. But I also was scared, to be frank. I was scared at times to make that break. I had seen what happened to some of my former colleagues who had made that break and how they became the subjects of the vitriol and the vile rhetoric that comes out of Mr. Trump and his associates when you break with him. If I were to say anything to the people, though, that may be finding themselves in a similar situation to the situation that I found myself in, or just that they want to make that break, it's possible. We can't, and what I think is, in my opinion, again, what I think is damaging in ways is isolating the people that come out and then questioning why they did. It is hard to come out. It was hard to find my way out because of what we said. I had financial limitations and I did have other counsel, but it was also hard coming out on the outside because I didn't know if I'd be welcomed by people. So I think that, if we can create and foster an environment where people feel that they're welcomed and that there is a life on the other side, which is one of the more eye-opening parts of this experience for me too, is that there are good people in this world that want to help and that are there and that have similar interests that we do, that we all want the Republic to survive. We all should want this Republic to survive. But in the way that Mr. Trump's trajectory currently is going, I'm not confident that he will have it survive. And, I would just encourage them to think about that.
When you say that, we speak at a moment when Mr. Trump is dozens of points ahead of his nearest opponent in the Republican presidential primary. The tone in the political press about what's happening in the Republican presidential primary is that even people who support his competitors are effectively conceding that he's going to be the nominee. Republicans seem poised to choose him again, even after what happened the last time, and specifically what you were able to tell the country about what it was like inside the White House. I was struck in the book, not just about what you said about January 6th, but some of the other ways that you described what was bad about him as a president. On COVID, you said, I doubt any politician could have led the country through the deadliest pandemic in 100 years without making errors of judgment and execution. But of all the people in the world, President Trump was uniquely unsuited to the challenge. He lacked empathy and was stubborn and impatient. You said he had a restless, impulsive personality. You described his attention span not being up to an average meeting. I noticed that his eyes often wandered the room when the meetings outlasted his attention span. Ultimately, you described what happened on January 6th as, from him, at a minimum, a shocking dereliction of duty. I mean, all of the things that you described from having seen him up close are public record now.
Right.
None of these things are secrets. Why do you think your fellow Republicans want him more than they want anybody else as their next candidate for the White House?
I can't speak to the psyche of I won't say my fellow Republicans, because I do not think that we are a part of the same Republican Party. I still consider myself a Republican. I consider myself a Republican in the sense of Senator Mitt Romney and the Reagan Republican Party. I believe that the Republican Party needs a strong conservative party. I do not believe that Mr. Trump is a strong Republican. But in this next election cycle, in my opinion, it's the make or break moment for the Republican Party. Now is the time. If these politicians, these men and some women that are currently in Congress want to make the break and want to take the stand, they have to do it now. We can't wait any longer for them to do it. I don't know why they're so willing to support him. I think it's extremely disappointing, and it is not a hard issue to take. We're talking about a man who, at the very essence of his being, almost destroyed democracy in one day, and he wants to do it again. He wants to run for president to do it again. He's been indicted 4 times since January 6th. I would not have a clear conscience and be able to sleep at night if I were a Republican in Congress that supported Donald Trump. And, I think that if they're not willing to split with that, then we're in serious danger for the party.
I want to talk with you about those indictments. I know you've spoken with federal prosecutors and with the Fulton County grand jury. I want to ask you about some of the news that you've broken in the book. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Cassidy Hutchinson is our guest. We'll be right back. Thank you again for being here. You write in the book about, in detail about your interactions with the January 6th committee. You did 6 interviews with them plus the live testimony. But then you also say that you met, I believe, 3 times with Justice Department personnel and prosecutors and once with the Fulton County grand jury. Is that all correct? Do you expect to be called to testify in any of the Trump trials?
I have fully complied with all government investigations in all entities thus far, and I will continue to do so.
But you can't talk about whether you're going to testify.
If or when I am asked to testify, I will comply as fully as I have in the past.
Did prosecutors involved in any of those conversations or any of the live cases ask you to leave certain topics out of the book?
No. No, everything that is in the book is also consistent with my transcripts that are on the record with the government or with the January 6th committee.
Okay.
Well, everything pertaining to the election fraud.
Yeah.
And Mr. Trump's attempt to overthrow the government to stay in power. All in the public record.
One of the things that you describe in some detail in the book that I don't just quite know what to make of involves your direct boss, Mark Meadows. I've been describing you the shorthand, and you use this in the book. You say sort of chief of staff to the chief of staff. You're essentially the top staffer to Mr. Meadows. So you're with him a lot of the time. You definitely know what's going on in his life. You're close to him in the work sense every day that he's in the office. And yet there is some mystery that I don't totally understand as to what he was burning in his fireplace and to what he was doing with either classified or previously classified documents related to Crossfire Hurricane, related to the Russia investigation. Are you describing what appeared to you to be either mishandling of classified information or mishandling of presidential records, destruction of presidential records, which of course is not allowed?
You know, the final days, it obviously was chaotic in a number of ways. I was under the impression, and I know there were several of my colleagues that were under the impression that how classified documents were being handled was not within proper protocol. Now, with saying that, I think it speaks also just to how reckless and careless much of the administration was, not taking classified document protocol seriously a lot of the time. We've seen that with Mr. Trump as well. But, you know, specific to my experience with Mr. Meadows in the final days of the administration, you know, I talk about it a lot in the book to shed light on how chaotic things were. But, you know, I can't really speak to what he was doing. I would leave that as a question to him.
I mean, it does sound like there were confrontations in the White House, including those that involved you, related to perceived mishandling of sensitive information.
That's correct.
I dropped the bag on Pat Cipolloni's floor. Here are your classified documents back from the reporters, Mark. I didn't hide my contempt, my words rife with sarcasm. Mark and Mr. Cipollone peered into the bag. I saw Mark swallow hard. Pat shot me a piercing look. Overwhelmed, Pat agonized. Seriously, seriously, we do not have time for this. I was already walking out of his office. You then describe Mr. Meadows at 11:45 a.m. on Inauguration Day, asking the Secret Service how quickly they can get to the Justice Department because he wants to try to declassify something literally in the last 15 minutes when Donald Trump is president.
Joe Biden's about to get sworn in, so yes.
What was that about? What was he trying to do?
That specific binder was pertinent to Crossfire Hurricane, which, for the record, at the time, I had no idea what Crossfire Hurricane was. But looking at the bigger picture here, bringing it back to next year's election, these people very well could be in power again. And do we want people who have already shown that they're willing and want to overthrow an election, for a duly elected president, which is the pinnacle of our democracy? Do we want to put people like that back in power? Do we want to put people back in power that have mishandled and have been showed to mishandle the most sensitive national security secrets that our nation has? You know, that's the question that we need to ask ourselves.
We got a statement from a spokesperson for Mr. Meadows tonight, not sort of just vaguely casting aspersions at you, it's most of the statement, but then saying much of her claims in this book about Mr. Meadows are otherwise are filled with half-truths, falsehoods, and purposefully omitting context to sell books. Mr. Maddow is essentially just casting aspersions on your character, saying that you are making things up out of whole cloth in order to make money. You worked so closely with him for a long time, but you also describe in the book that you never really trusted him, and there are several instances you describe in which he flat out lied to you, even on close working matters where you should have been on the same side. I should just ask for a response to you for that statement and ask you what you think happened between you and Mark Meadows.
I don't think there was anything necessarily negative to happen between me and Mark Meadows. I was very outspoken after January 6th about how I felt about it. Mark and I also knew that we were two different people, and that's okay. You know, we regularly talked about it. We would regularly joke about it, that I was more moderate than he was, but we did in large part work well together.
More ideologically moderate.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, ideologically moderate, more so than he was. But, you know, putting that aside, that in an environment like that, that doesn't matter as much. In terms of his statement, you know, I would encourage him to go testify under oath if he thinks that what is in the book and what I have testified to under oath, which is consistent with what is in the book, he can go testify under oath if he has strong feelings about that.
Were you disappointed that the Justice Department elected not to prosecute him for contempt of Congress when he ignored the congressional subpoena that you responded to from the January 6th investigation?
I'll leave it to Mr. Meadows and his team to respond to that. What I will say is I hope that Mark is now doing the right thing, what I define as the right thing, which is coming forth and honoring your oath that you swore to protect your country, not your president.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. I have something to ask you about that creeps me out. I'm sorry. I'm in advance.
I'm used to it. It's okay.
All right. All right. The creepy questions when we come back. Yak, what a tease, huh? We'll be right back with Cassidy Hutchinson right after this. It comes out tomorrow. Ms. Hutchinson, one of the claims in your book that received some attention ahead of publication is an allegation you make that Rudy Giuliani effectively groped you at the Trump rally on January 6th. You say that he reached his hand under your blazer and then under your skirt. Mr. Giuliani's spokesperson has called this a disgusting lie against Mayor Giuliani. He gave us that statement again himself tonight. But I was struck by the fact that he was not the only one. Page 52 of the book, you say that John Boehner, of all people, looked down at my cranberry vodka and whispered, "Dark liquor or red wine from now on." Then he tugged on the ends of my hair, saying, "And lose the ponytail." You describe one man who worked in the White House, Mike McKenna, as having a tendency to publicly single out women with crude and demeaning comments. You describe the president, and this is not groping, this is not physical, but you describe him as telling you to add blonde highlights to your hair, which you then went home and did and came back to the White House the next day. That doesn't happen in normal workplaces. I'm just telling you now. Sorry.
Yeah, I learn a lot on the outside.
Yes. There's a whole world out there when guys get fired for doing stuff like that.
It's unbelievable. Well, it's shouldn't be unbelievable.
Shouldn't be unbelievable. But there's also a couple of instances involving Congressman Matt Gaetz. I will omit most of the context here, but I'll tell you the lines that have kept me up and uncomfortable. He chuckled and brushed his thumb across my chin. Has anyone ever told you you're a national treasure? You describe a night at Camp David when he was leaning against the door frame while somebody answered the door to another cabin. Matt straightened his posture when Kevin McCarthy asked him what he wanted. He explained he had seen my golf cart parked outside and thought this was my cabin. Embarrassed, I got up and asked Mr. Gaetz what he needed. He explained that he was lost and asked me to escort him to his cabin. I told him to proceed around the Circle Drive. All the cabins are clearly marked. It's impossible to get lost. He asked me one more time to leave with him. Kevin McCarthy then said, quote, "Get a life, Matt," and shut the door. Now, Mr. Gaetz, we asked him for comment on these allegations tonight. He told us, "I don't remember either of these events. And based on Cassidy's prior false statements, I doubt they occurred. I did date Cassidy for a few weeks when we were both single years ago. We parted amicably and remained friends thereafter, even during President Trump's post-presidency." And then he goes on to make other unrelated claims. I'm sorry to ask you if you want to respond to that, but I'm going to ask you if you want to respond.
I would love to respond to that, Rachel,
Okay.
so thank you for giving me the option.
Yeah.
I will give Matt credit in his part of his statement that we did have an amicable working relationship, and we were good friends at points. Matt Gaetz, in my opinion, is somebody that I personally do not hold in high regards in terms of trust, and I do not think that Matt Gaetz has the best track record for relationships and condoning his relationships how he thinks that they might be defined. I will say on behalf of myself, I never dated Matt Gaetz. I have much higher standards in men, and Matt, frankly, is a very unserious politician. We see that today with the ruckus that he is causing on Capitol Hill with the spending negotiations, and I don't really have much else to say to somebody that is more concerned about a soundbite than actually passing legislation.
Mr. Giuliani's remark in response to your allegation about him, which was graphic and gross, was that this was a disgusting lie against him. Do you stand by that statement despite his pushback?
I stand by my statement and what I described in the book, and I agree that it was gross.
Cassidy Hutchinson, you have been through a lot, particularly as a very young woman who had to do a lot of this on her own. The record that you've given us is much, much, much more complete than anybody else could have given us, and it took a lot of bravery to get there. This has been a hard time in your life, but you've done a service to your country, and I hope that good things happen for you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson